Just because Dustin Johnson withdrew doesn't mean the AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am isn't worth our attention. Yeah, DJ, when he opened on FanDuel Sportsbook, was 4-1 to win outright. It's a 20% probability to win. And actually, my win simulation models, he was like a solid value. The number was appropriate. But even without him, this event is much more. It's more wide open and frankly a little more interesting. From a daily fantasy standpoint, from a betting standpoint, we still have big names at the top too. Patrick Cantlay, Daniel Berger, Jordan Spieth, Jason Day, and more. There's plenty to dig into. So welcome on into the FanDuel PGA Q&A for this week's PGA Tour event, the AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am. I'm your host, Brandon Gdula. I'm the managing editor over at numberFire.com, and I'll be talking about the field, the betting odds on FanDuel Sportsbook, the daily fantasy slate on FanDuel, my win simulations, just about anything you want. If you have questions, comments, hit up YouTube, Facebook, Periscope, Twitch. If you have anything you want to know about this week. But if not, I'm going to get started with the high-level stuff for this week. We've got a full field for this week. We have a cut after 36 holes. Historically, this Pro-Am is actually a Pro-Am, and it's a 54-hole cut, and they play typically at 3 courses. This year, it's down to 2. We're keeping Pebble Beach, obviously, and Spyglass Hill. No Monterey Peninsula this week. So that does mean that 3 of the rounds will be at Pebble Beach. But each golfer will play Pebble and Spyglass before the cut on Friday once they get to 36 holes. But, I mean, if you look at this field, it's pretty weak, but there are some good names. So, I mean, looking at things on FanDuel Sportsbook, we have Patrick Cantlay, the favorite, at 7-1. Daniel Berger's 14-1. Paul Casey 18-1. Will Zalatoris 19. Jason Day 21. Francesco Molinari, Jordan Spieth, some major winners, both 23-1, and then a drop to Max Homa at 31-1. So, yeah, it looks a lot different than it did whenever DJ was in the field, whenever he was the favorite. Patrick Cantlay was 10-1. He moved to 7.5-1, and he's now 7-1. Berger was, I believe, 18-1, down to 14. So everything's sort of shifted. It's hard to track line movement because Dustin Johnson did withdraw pretty late on Monday night. Again, if you have any questions about this week's field, hit up the YouTube chat, Facebook, Periscope, Twitch, and I will answer those questions as they come in. But for now, I'm going to keep going, look at the course, specifically focusing on Pebble Beach. So I'm going to go over to Data Golf here and look at a few things. Specifically recent winners, I always like to look at, which names have won. That you have to contextualize that for the strength of field for each and every year. This year, strength of field is actually way down, even if, you could probably see that from the name value. But according to the official World Golf Rankings, this one's clocking in at about a 141 in their strength of field rating. Last year was a 212. The year prior, 277. This is actually kind of comparable to the Sanderson Farms from last year. So kind of gives you some context for what type of field we're looking at. But recent winners, Nick Taylor kind of ran away with this one, 19 under last year. The year before was Phil Mickelson, also at 19 under. And then spreadsheet ruiner, Ted Potter Jr. Or Ted Potter, comma, Jr. Sometimes there's a period, sometimes there's not. But he won the year prior in 2018 at 17 under. And then it was Jordan Spieth, 19 under. And then Vaughn Taylor, 17 under. So kind of a mixed bag, but we have seen some bigger names pull this out and get a win here. But we could see a long shot winner. That won't surprise me. And it's a lot more open now without Dustin Johnson in the simulation and in the betting market. But as for the key stats that stand out, it's pretty close to your average PGA Tour stop. We will see here the scoring dispersion, according to Data Golf, mostly explained by 2 stats as usual: strokes gained approach at 36.2% and strokes gained putting 36.9%. Now these numbers will come just from the performance on Pebble, not Spyglass, for this week. But typically everything comes down to irons and putting. That's just almost always how it works, unless you have kind of an outlier performance around the green or off the tee. But off the tee play here specifically rates out much less important than your average PGA Tour stop. So that is certainly something to keep in mind, but got to hit your irons and you got to make putts. Jumping over to the course fit tool here, we can see that this outline is almost exactly in line with the average course in terms of what matters at Pebble Beach. There's the one stat that doesn't really check the box here is driving accuracy. That's a little bit lower here. But if I want to, I can add an overlay, which is just a great feature to have. In terms of similar courses, sometimes when we see these multi-course layouts, we do get to see that the courses are higher up on the list than usual. There's some sort of similarity here, but for this week, we actually have Spyglass Hill way toward the bottom. It's not that similar to Pebble Beach in terms of the key stats that matter here. We see driving distance shoot way up, and really we see every stat outperform the PGA Tour average aside from driving accuracy. Distance is way up, approach is up a bit, around the green plays up a bit, putting up a bit, and driving accuracy just drops off. So if you're going to factor in one of the off the tee stats, driving distance should be the one. I mentioned this last week, but any golfer can kind of club down and hit a fairway whenever they need to. I mean, not everyone, specifically Jordan Spieth, but you can't fake distance. So I would say distance is something that can get you a leg up before the weekend for your round at Spyglass Hill. So all things considered, I'm trying to play this one pretty standard, and that leads me to like the key stats that I'm looking at generally. So that leads me to strokes gained approach because as we usually see, it just explains so much more of the tee to green performance than either off the tee or around the green. That's the case this week. Sticking with strokes gained approach, number one. I'm going to put driving distance on the list just for what I just said. At Spyglass Hill, it seems like that's going to be something that is more important than driving accuracy for this week. Strokes gained putting should always be on the list to some degree because putting is not completely random. It is hard to predict. It's hard to predict the outliers, but we do generally know who is a good putter. And this week, both courses are on POA greens if you have access to that from Fantasy National or any other source. That would be the split you'd want to look at this week. But I also have bogey avoidance on the list just because scores don't go super low. And this week we could see a lot of bad weather. So it's probably not the perfect stat. You could look at wind splits if you want. I typically tried not to use those too much because I don't know. So if I do factor in wind performance in the wind, it's going to be a very small percentage of what I'm looking at. And actually event history is my fifth key stat. It's going to be weighted very minimally. I'm not probably actually going to weight it into any of my modeling at all. But if we look at, again, data golf here, sticking with this, we can see that course history is most predictive at basically one other course more than Pebble Beach. This is Pebble Beach in green. We can see it's almost at the top of the list. This is Augusta, which we pretty much all know that you have to, it's incredibly rare for a first timer to succeed at Augusta. But trailing just Augusta, we have Pebble Beach and a few others on par with that. So I would have to think this has something to do with the Pro-Am setup, rotating the courses. But I think there's some credence to put on past history at the AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am for this week. So again, my five key stats for this week: strokes gained approach, driving distance, strokes gained putting, specifically on POA, bogey avoidance, and to a small degree, event history. I'm going to bump over to my spreadsheet here and look at the top of the field from a FanDuel salary standpoint. Dustin Johnson with $12,400. He's out of the field, but we still have some good names at the top, beginning with Patrick Cantlay at 11.9, Daniel Berger at 11.6, Paul Casey's 11.4. Will Zalatoris really interesting this week. He could go under the radar because of where his salary is next to some bigger names. At 11.2, Jordan Spieth, somebody who deserves a lot of attention after his 61 on Saturday. Last week, he's 11.1, and then Jason Day just kind of rounds out the 11,000 and above. Lots of good form, specifically from Day and Spieth at Pebble Beach. So they're interesting from that angle this week. But as you can see here, I'll zoom in a little bit. But My win model, which actually is just the average of two different win models, they have two favorites here. It's Patrick Cantlay at 9.9% and Daniel Berger at 8.7%. And everyone else sort of drops off, and it's pretty flat behind them in that second tier. We do see that bear out in the betting odds on FanDuel Sportsbook with Cantlay now 7-1, actually, not 7.5, and Berger at 14-1. So I was leaning initially toward Patrick Cantlay as the number one, but I've warmed up to Daniel Berger as the one stud I would try to prioritize in cash game lineups. The reason for that is it's close, but here's the real differentiator. You can see all these, both of these names, all green across the board in the key stat. Whenever I adjust strokes gained for field strength, they're the two best tee to green players in the field. But this stat here, POA putting, is kind of the key differentiator for me, with Berger being in the 83rd percentile in this field and Cantlay in the 52nd percentile. But you can't really go wrong with either. I would be inclined to play either one of them. But as I'll talk about in a second, the value this week is pretty absent. And so it's kind of hard to get excited about a two-step lineup whenever that means you're going to be living in that 9,000, below 9,000 range. There's not a whole lot of names who are super appealing. So I think this second tier really starts with Casey, Zalatoris, Spieth, and Day. Spieth I have highlighted in orange because he's more of a he's going to be volatile. He was really tuned in at times on this whole past weekend, specifically on Saturday. He looked like Jordan Spieth of old. But we can see here the strokes getting off the tee still a problem. He lost a lot of strokes off the tee. We gained a bunch with the approach and have a good putter, that's sort of the classic Spieth putter. So his biggest issue is not so much distance. I think that might get lost. That's kind of a misconception sometimes with Spieth. Is he's not specifically short. He's in the 67th percentile over the past 100 rounds on the PGA Tour in driving distance gained versus the fields he's faced, according to FantasyNational.com. But he's in the 5th percentile in this field in fairways gained. He can probably get away with it. He won here in 2017, was playing a lot better then in 2017 than he is now. But I think there are reasons to be willing to buy back in. At this point, with Berger and Cantlay being where they are, I'd probably be more inclined to bet Jordan Spieth outright than tie a daily fantasy lineup around Spieth. But I do think that he's in play. I would just try to keep track of his popularity for this week. But I also like Jason Day. Really, really good performances at Pebble Beach. Basically, 4 top 5s in the past 5 years. His main issue is the irons. He's 52nd percentile in adjusted long-term strokes gained approach, but it's more from up and down iron play. It's less about. It's not that he can't have spike weeks. It's just more that they've been inconsistent. So if he pops there from an iron standpoint, he should really pay off this week. So I think that we have a lot of options, even without Dustin Johnson in the field. The bigger issue becomes, what do you do behind those names? This 10,000 tier on FanDuel, pretty intriguing, kind of from top to bottom. Francesco Molinari showing life. I did put an outright on him. Just trying to jump on anything I can whenever he shows some signs, because we know what he can be at the high end. Siwoo Kim, recent winner, Cameron Davis, Sam Burns, Kevin Stroman, Ricky Fowler, Phil Mickelson. You want to talk great form at Pebble Beach? Phil has it. Max Homa, really good historically on the West Coast swing. We've seen that again from him this year. And then Henrik Norlander. I mean, I would be fine with almost any of these golfers, but the one I would focus on most is Sam Burns. The reason being, just really good numbers across the board. Maybe doesn't rate out quite as well as these other names, but it is high end. He is phenomenal. That's just the case. Very long off the tee, 98th percentile in driving distance. Pretty solid POA putter, 72nd percentile. And if you give me elite off the tee play and the potential to have some of the best irons in the field and be able to putt, That's a pretty good recipe. But I also like Cameron Davis, Max Homa, a few. Not necessarily. Homa's not necessarily young, but compared to Ricky and of course Phil, he does fit. But I think, honestly, any of these guys could be in play from a daily fantasy standpoint. And that leads me to just believe in a balanced lineup construction for the week, because things drop off a lot. I had a hard time uh, picking even 5 golfers in this range of 9,000, because you start to see these red flags creep in. You start to see a lot of black dots, which means they're below field average, just in terms of percentile rankings in these key stats. So, and problematically, most of the names I like are toward the top end of this 9,000 range, with Brian Harmon, Cam Tringali at 9,900 each, Matthew Neesmith. Harold Varner is someone who's easy to get a little ahead of ourselves with, because the tee to green game can be so good. 99th percentile there in adjusted strokes gained tee to green, but the putting is 30th percentile. The putting on POA, not very good either. So he can really kind of we can get ahead of ourselves because of the potential from Harold Varner. But look, this field just kind of gets bad, and it's reflected in the depth of the field, the strength of field rating being down to a 141. Really kind of skews things. So it's really hard to find value you can build around. So as I was talking to Jim Sonas on the Heat Check podcast earlier today, the way that I would want to play this week is pick your studs and then rotate in your value. So if you're playing, let's say you want to play 10 lineups, it's not a full multi-entry, but it's also, you're not playing just one lineup. Decide between your Cantlay, Berger, is Jason Day for you, Spieth, who in that 10,000 range, Burns, Cameron Davis. Pick those guys and then rotate in these lower end plays, because it gets pretty rough. And this range here is not that appealing to begin with, but I'll show the below 9,000 range. It gets pretty tough. And yes, whenever one of those golfers, if you play them and they have a top 10 or top 15, even a top 20, you can gain a lot of leverage, but the win equity becomes so low. This week, it's a little bit different. I've talked last week where big names win at Phoenix. We saw Brooks Koepka do it. We saw a few names flirting there, but percentage-wise, there are a lot more low-end golfers. And if you look at the leaderboard, a few guys spike like a James Hahn, but this week is at least a little more interesting from a value play standpoint. So I'm going to show those guys down here, but not a ton stands out to me. Again, the win equity is just pretty low. Joel Damon is someone that my model likes a lot, mostly because he just has really good long-term form when adjusted to field strength. He has his issues, specifically the short game. The around the green play is not great. Not great on POA, but the tee to green numbers, 88th percentile there. Ches Reavie is also in play. Jim talked about him. I said I wouldn't talk anyone out of Ches this week. We saw Ches pop in the 2019 U.S. Open at Pebble Beach. I wouldn't put too much stock into the 2019 U.S. Open, just because the course layout a lot harder than it's going to be this week. But Ches, the recent performance, the putting, that's kind of the issue there. Rory Sabatini is also someone my model likes, relative to the salary. Just, again, good long-term form for the salary, one of the better performers down here. And fine enough tee to green, 73rd percentile, just not a good POA putter. So, but, everyone has issues down here, and that's the issue. So if you want to play some value, and you don't maybe want to stick with Harold Varner, Damon, Ches, I would say probably just try to save even more salary, because one of the key things to look for on FanDuel each and every week is the difference between the low and mid 9,000 range compared to the low and mid and even upper 8,000 range. Some weeks that's where the drop off is, because it's a deeper field. And we'll get guys like Brian Harmon listed at 92, 9,300. Max Homa, same thing. Those guys are more like low 9,000 plays generally. They're bumped up, so the occurs around 9,600 with Matthew Neesmith. So there's not a huge difference between the low 9,000 and the lower to mid 8,000 range. So I would be open just to jumping down more. But Bo Hogue, Ryan Moore, Patrick Rogers, some guys I have highlighted who do enough to be in contention for me. But, according to my win simulations here, it's pretty flat, all things considered, behind Cantlay and Berger. Now, Berger actually rates out as a very, very good value at 14-1. I would strongly consider betting him. I've actually been very close. I've been kind of a week early. I was a week early on Patrick Reed, was almost a week early on Xander, who was runner-up last week. My pick last week actually was Daniel Berger. He missed the cut. It was, on the number. I think there's a lot to like about Daniel Berger, so I'm probably going to stick with Daniel Berger at 14-1. I think that's a fair number. I think Patrick Cantlay is justifiable at 7-1, but not necessarily someone I am enamored with. I would be more inclined to look for some value, specifically with, you can see Sam Burns here, 37-1, 3.3% likely to win. The model likes him just because of the distance, the putting, just good long-term form, all things considered. I would consider Jason Day. I would consider Jordan Spieth. Like I said, I'm probably more open to Jordan Spieth, from an outright standpoint than maybe even a daily fantasy standpoint. But he's still in play for me. Again, if you guys have any questions, just hit up the YouTube chat and I can get to some stuff. But if not, I'm just going to go through some of my favorite picks, some of the picks I'm considering to win this week, maybe even top 10s. But again, probably Berger at the top. Probably going to go with Sam Burns to 1. I think that's a fair number for him. Joel Damon is someone who the model likes for an outright. I would be more inclined to bet Joel Damon with the putting, the short game issues, more of a top 10 play, possibly in each way if that's something that you like to do. Max Homa would be someone I would consider. So I know it's a lot of I'd consider this guy, but I think what it comes down to this week is there's no DJ at 4-1. If you were going to bet DJ at 4-1, you'd have to put a lot of units on that to make it worthwhile. And then you probably just look at some long shots and avoid this tier. Without that, I think if you don't go with Berger or Cantlay, you sort of pepper this range, like the 20 to 40 range. It's probably where I would settle in. Then you don't have to sort of risk it with long shots, but that's the way that I would play it. Again, I'm probably going to get to Berger before things tee off, just because it's a little sort of FOMO for me with being so close on a few guys. But if not, I think this is where the real value is with like Max Homa, maybe Cam Davis. Sort these by win odds here. Brian Harmon, good spot here for Harmon. Kind of glossed over him a little bit, but really good POA putting and just good tee to green numbers, 85th percentile there, adjusted long term, and just he's fifth in long term adjusted strokes gained for me since the start of 2020. So really easy to like Brian Harmon. So again, this is probably where I'm going to wind up with most of my betting card. If I go with Berger, I'm going to have to sort of, even that out a little bit, maybe take some more shots on like a Damon at a longer number. But, if not, I think this is probably where I would end up, where my model is showing the most value. So I think it's, again, no DJ, but we have Jordan Spieth back. Again, there are reasons to be to buy in, especially buy in a little early. I think he will be the second most popular golfer, probably behind Patrick Cantlay, just because in all my research, I looked at optimals, and just popularity percentages in PGA and FanDuel. The favorite, the highest salaried golfer, almost always is the most popular golfer in a given week. And then there's probably one or two other guys who get to that point where it's like, hey, if I avoid Jordan Spieth and he were to miss the cut, it would not be fun, because it's fun to watch Jordan Spieth go do his thing. You can get a lot of leverage. So I'd consider Spieth for an outright. I'd consider Jason Day, but I'm probably going to settle more in with Cam Davis. He's looking more and more appealing. Sam Burns also looking pretty appealing. So I'm probably going to be living in this mid-range. But, no Dustin Johnson, but this is going to be a good one from a different perspective, different than what we saw last week with Xander and Spieth and Brooks battling back. It's going to be more. There's going to be weather. Weather's going to be a factor. We're going to see maybe a long shot actually win. I'd probably just wait and see who kind of gets through everything. Who's looking good? Who's striking the ball well? Check out some live tee to green numbers. That's one of the biggest ways that you can get some leverage for live betting. But that's going to be all I have for today. I do think it's going to be it's not as fun without Dustin Johnson coming back over from Saudi Arabia, but there are a lot of reasons still to be engaged with this event. I think there's value here at the top, especially with Berger. So and frankly, without DJ, it makes daily fantasy lineups a lot more. They're a lot more wide open. You don't have to play Dustin Johnson in a cash game, and that's always a nice feeling. You can play things different. You can go with a very balanced build and hug 10,000, or you can say it's going to be a Cantlay week, it's going to be a Berger week, and still play it almost as if you would play it with Dustin Johnson. But again, that's all I have for today. Feel free to hit me up on Twitter at Gdula13. Check out my DFS content on numberFire.com. Best of luck this week, and let's hit a winner.